Imagine this. Your Canadian passport, which usually opens doors all over the world, becomes a reason for obstacles in certain countries. As unbelievable as it may seem, there are destinations where Canadians aren't exactly welcomed with open arms, and the reasons might surprise you. Today, we'll be showing you 15 countries where Canadian travelers might encounter, let's say, unexpected obstacles. If you have a Canadian passport, or you're simply a travel enthusiast, then this list is for you, so stay tuned. Find out which destinations you should avoid or plan for very carefully. So, North Korea. Let's start with one of the most mysterious and isolated countries in the world, North Korea. For any foreign traveler, especially for Canadians, visiting this country is a real challenge. North Korea is tightly controlled by its government, and access is limited to state-approved travel agencies. It's impossible to travel alone in North Korea, as tourists are accompanied at all times by official guides who control their every move and activity. The control of information is so strict that visitors cannot interact freely with the local population or explore the country on their own. Any comment, gesture, or action that could be interpreted as disrespectful towards the regime or its leader can have serious consequences. It's not uncommon to hear of tourists being arrested for seemingly minor offenses, such as taking pictures in a prohibited place or touching a propaganda poster. For Canadians, diplomatic tensions between Canada and North Korea make the situation even more complex. Although some travelers have managed to visit the country, the risk is always present. Any misstep can lead to serious legal consequences, including imprisonment, as has already happened to citizens of other countries. In second place, Iran is a country with thousands of years of history and culture. Many travelers are drawn to its fascinating past, which includes great civilizations like the Persian Empire. However, for Canadians, Iran can be a complicated destination because of the tense relationship between the two countries. Canada broke off diplomatic relations with Iran in 2012, which means there is no Canadian embassy in the country to help citizens if they have problems. The laws in Iran are very strict, especially for women, who must follow a dress code that includes wearing a hijab, headscarf, and modest clothing in public. Breaking these rules can result in severe punishments. Also, Canadian travelers need to be very careful about what they post on social media or discuss in public, as any criticism of the government or political system can be grounds for arrest. Canadians' access is also limited by the perception that Iranians have of the West. Given the history of tension between Iran and Western powers, Canadian travelers may be subject to increased scrutiny. It is essential that those who decide to travel to Iran do so with full awareness of local laws and with great respect for the culture and customs. Okay, Venezuela is another country where Canadians might face some serious problems. It used to be a popular place for tourists in Latin America, but things have changed a lot in the past few years. Venezuela has been going through a really tough time with its politics and its economy. And on top of that, Canada and Venezuela haven't been getting along since Canada spoke out against Nicolas Maduro's government, especially when it comes to human rights and how the country is being run. The country is dealing with a huge humanitarian crisis. They don't have enough food, medicine, or even basic services. It's not safe in a lot of parts of the country, and there's a lot of violence that affects both the people who live there and tourists. Getting a visa is really hard for Canadians now because the two governments aren't friendly. Even if you do get a visa, traveling in Venezuela is still really difficult. There's something called hyperinflation, which makes it almost impossible to buy things normally. Tourists often have to rely on locals to help them figure out the money situation. It's hard to enjoy the culture and have a good time when you are always worried about your safety and have to be so careful all the time. In fourth place, Saudi Arabia, a country with strict laws based on a conservative interpretation of Islam, is not an easy place for Canadians to visit, especially those unfamiliar with local customs. The country has a very strict moral code governing public behavior, with specific rules for men and women. For example, women must wear an abaya, a long, loose-fitting dress in public, and cover their heads in certain areas. Relationships between single or unmarried men and women are closely monitored, and any interaction deemed inappropriate can have legal consequences. Drinking alcohol is forbidden, and possession of alcohol can result in severe penalties, including imprisonment. Diplomatic relations between Canada and Saudi Arabia have also worsened in recent years. In 2018, Canada publicly criticized Saudi Arabia's human rights record, which led to a breakdown in relations between the two countries. Since then, Saudi Arabia has been less welcoming to Canadians, making interactions more difficult and travel more challenging for visitors. Number 5. Russia, with its huge size and rich cultural history, is a dream destination for many travelers. However, for Canadians, traveling to Russia can be difficult because of political tensions between the two countries. Diplomatic relations have worsened in recent years, especially after Russia took over Crimea in 2014 and because of disagreements between Russia and the West. One of the biggest challenges for Canadians who want to visit Russia is the visa process. It's complicated and requires a lot of paperwork. Tourists also have to register with the local authorities, especially if they plan to stay in the country for more than a few days. Breaking these rules can lead to fines, being kicked out of the country, or even being put in jail. Also, freedom of speech is quite limited in Russia. Canadians need to be very careful about what they say or post on social media, especially when it comes to criticizing the Russian government or its president, Vladimir Putin. Foreigners are not allowed to take part in protests or political activities. Getting involved in these kinds of activities can lead to being arrested. In sixth place, we have China. China is one of the most fascinating countries in the world, with thousands of years of history and a unique blend of modern and traditional elements. However, if you're thinking of traveling to China, there are a few things you should know that might make your trip a little more complex. First off, diplomatic relations between Italy and China have been a bit rocky in recent years. Remember the controversy surrounding the house arrest of Meng Wanzhou, a Huawei executive in Canada? Well, that led to some diplomatic tension between the countries. On top of that, the Chinese government has strict laws and regulations that can be challenging for travelers. Internet access is heavily controlled, with many Western social media platforms and websites blocked, including our beloved WhatsApp. You have to be careful about what you say and do, as any criticism of the Chinese government can be taken very seriously and have serious consequences, including detention or deportation. Oh, and the visa process for China is quite strict and requires careful planning. If you're planning a trip to China, make sure you follow all visa regulations and local laws, which can be quite different from ours. 7. Afghanistan has been devastated by decades of conflict and continues to be one of the most dangerous countries in the world. For Canadian citizens, traveling in Afghanistan is not only extremely difficult, but also very dangerous due to political instability, terrorism, and widespread violence. Since the withdrawal of international troops in 2021 and the Taliban's seizure of power, the situation in the country has drastically worsened. Canadians wishing to travel to Afghanistan for humanitarian or professional reasons must be extremely cautious and aware that the Canadian government has very limited access to consular assistance if needed. The risk of kidnapping, terrorist attacks, and sectarian violence is high, and poor infrastructure makes travel within the country extremely dangerous. 8th. Syria, another country devastated by war, remains one of the most dangerous places in the world for tourists, especially Canadians. The civil war, which began in 2011, has left the country in ruins, with millions of people displaced and much of the infrastructure destroyed. The violence and clashes between different factions persist, and tensions between the Syrian and Canadian governments make it nearly impossible for Canadians to travel to this country safely. Furthermore, extremist groups such as ISIS continue to be active in some parts of the country, posing a significant threat to foreigners. Those who travel to Syria run the risk of being kidnapped or injured, and the Canadian government has no representation in the country to provide assistance in an emergency. Number 9. Yemen is facing one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world, with an ongoing civil war that has devastated the country. The security situation is extremely dangerous for any visitor, including Canadians, with access to many areas controlled by various armed groups. The situation is so serious that the Canadian government has issued strong warnings against all travel to Yemen. Canadians who try to travel to Yemen are not only putting themselves at physical risk, but also facing a terrible lack of basic services, such as healthcare, drinking water, and food. Food shortages and disease outbreaks make it almost impossible to guarantee the safety of tourists in the country. Number 10. Somalia, another country devastated by conflict and violence, remains an extremely dangerous place for Canadians. The country has been in a civil war for decades, and the presence of terrorist groups like Al-Shabaab makes the risk of kidnapping and attacks very high. For Canadians, traveling to Somalia comes with many challenges, from getting a visa to ensuring their own safety. The Canadian government strongly advises against all travel to Somalia due to extreme risks, and anyone venturing there must be prepared to face emergencies in a country where consular services are virtually non-existent. 11. Belarus, under the rule of Alexander Lukashenko's authoritarian regime, has seen a rise in political repression in recent years. Canadians traveling to Belarus should be aware that freedom of speech is severely restricted, and any criticism or involvement in political activities could lead to arrest. Diplomatic relations between Canada and Belarus have also worsened, and sanctions imposed by Canada on the Belarusian government have created tension. Canadian tourists visiting Belarus should be extremely cautious and avoid any activities that could be seen as interfering in local political matters. Number 12. Libya has been in chaos since the fall of Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. Clashes between armed groups and the lack of a stable central government make travel to Libya extremely dangerous for Italians. Diplomatic tensions between Italy and Libya further complicate the situation, as access to consular services is very limited. The risk of kidnapping, violence, and terrorist attacks is high in many parts of Libya, and infrastructure in much of the country is destroyed, making travel to this country dangerous for any foreigner. 13. Because of political unrest and extremist groups, Iraq is still a dangerous country for Canadians. Some areas, like Iraqi Kurdistan, are relatively safe, but many other parts still have serious security problems. Canadians traveling in Iraq need to be extremely careful, avoid conflict zones, and make sure they have emergency plans in case of a crisis. Limited consular services can also make a crisis situation even more difficult. Number 14. Algeria. Although Algeria has a rich history and culture, Brazilians should be careful when visiting the country. There are political tensions and violence in some areas, especially in the mountains and deserts. Be careful if you visit these areas. Limits on what the press can say, and the chance of getting in trouble for being political, are also things to worry about. Also, safety problems in some areas, like the border with Mali, can be risky for Brazilian tourists who go there. And to wrap up our list, we arrive in Pakistan. While some parts of Pakistan are safe for tourists, others, especially those close to the border with Afghanistan and Kashmir, are very dangerous. Canadians traveling to Pakistan need to learn about the risky areas and stay away from any conflict zones or areas with a strong military presence. Also, diplomatic tensions between Canada and Pakistan, although less serious than in other cases, can make it hard to get visas and other services from the consulate. Canadian travelers need to be very careful and follow local customs to avoid legal problems. And that brings us to the end of our list of 15 countries where Canadians may not be exactly welcomed with open arms. Each of these destinations presents its own challenges, from diplomatic tensions to safety concerns. If you're a Canadian citizen planning a trip to any of these countries, it's crucial to do your research beforehand and take all necessary precautions. Let us know in the comments what you think about the list, and if any of these countries are on your travel bucket list. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Give the video a big thumbs up and share it with your friends if you found it helpful. See you next time.